So these are all, so we'll open with all the legal disclaimers. Henry, welcome to tonight's InfoCast, which is hosted by the Winchester Town Meeting Members Association. The topic of tonight's session is the State of the Town Initiative. Our guest is Select Board Member Bhayani, who is chairing the State of the Town Committee. He'll be providing an overview of the committee's purpose and structure and a status report on the key work elements, which include a forward look at the town's operating and capital budget needs, our asset management practices, and our tax and fiscal policies. Now, most of you are very familiar with the TMMA, but let me quickly state that the TMMA is an association of town meeting members. It is not an arm of the town government nor an arm of town meeting. And as such, the TMMA does not vote on or take positions on town issues or articles that are coming before town meeting. We will be recording this InfoCast and posting the recording to the TMMA's discussion board. And we may also provide the recording to WinCam for the broadcast, for rebroadcast. So if you can't stay for the whole of tonight's session, you can watch the late night reruns over the next several days, I suspect. There is a link to Paris's presentation slides in the email announcing this InfoCast. And the slides can also be downloaded using the link in the Zoom chat window, if we remember to put it in there. Okay, we did, good. This is we're getting better by the evening.
Coming soon.
Coming soon to a theater near you. Okay. If you have questions during the presentation, which I think will run about 20-30 minutes, type them into the chat window. We'll read them out during the Q&A session, then open the floor for questions. So thank all of you for participating. Paris?
Thank you, Lance and Carol, and to the TMMA. So it's good to see everyone here on the screen this evening. I think I know almost all of you, but for the one or two who don't, it's good to meet you. As Lance said, Paris Bhayani, I'm a member of our select board, and over the last 5 months have been chairing what we call our State of the Town Initiative, which is of course what we're here to talk about this evening. So I know people have the deck. I will go through it reasonably quickly, even though it is 25 or so minutes. It'll only allow me to sort of graze the tree tops. It might feel like a bit of drinking from a fire hose, but we'll have many more chances to talk about this before next spring. And so this is just sort of first introduction of a lot of the work that we've done. And Carol, do you mind sharing? Yeah, perfect. So why don't we go on to page 2, our table of contents. Sort of what we'll cover over the next 25 minutes is, why are we doing this? Why have we undertaken the State of the Town Initiative? Who is doing the work? I'll take a slight detour and talk about what's the strategy that sits behind the plan. And then the bulk of the time we'll spend on what's the analysis that's been completed to date, some of the key findings and early conclusions. Over time, that will be a fully baked plan. I would tell you today it's made substantial progress. There's a number of areas we've closed out. There's still a number of areas, however, that we still have work to do because we're aiming to get this closed out by roughly the end of the year, but potentially spilling into early next year. So we can go on to page 3. Which is the background and sort of the reasons behind the State of the Town. So I think, so all of the town is broadly doing quite well, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We do not have a crisis today, but we do have a structural deficit of about $4 million and growing. We have all of our collective bargaining agreements across both the municipal and educational side being settled this year. 2 police, a fire, 3 on DPW, as well as several on the education side, all being settled, and we expect to have additional expenses related to that. And we also have additional expenses related to making targeted investments, particularly in education, in some cases, and we'll talk about this in the municipal side, and especially in capital. And so our goal is to get on sort of good, solid ground proactively so that we can deliver on, the promises that we've made to residents and what residents are really looking for. And just for context, the gentleman to my right was the select board chair, and of course the one who really was the face with Mariana Volbov of the last override in 2019. That was expected to last 3 to 4 years due to federal funding, due to conservative financial management. It's lasted double that. So we are at a place where we need to put a real strategic planning effort in place. And so the select board created the State of the Town at the beginning of this year. We really got it going in May, shortly around and then after Springtown meeting. We created a large body of people that we'll talk about in a minute. But the view has always been, and we've stayed very true to this, that we wanted to create a comprehensive financial plan. You can stay one more.
Am I on the right?
No, page 3 still.
Oh.
Backward, yeah.
Sorry.
Nope, down one. Down one. Yeah, there we go. All right, so our action. So we wanted to create a comprehensive plan. So the easiest thing to do is just focus on what our needs are from an operating and capital perspective. And then, of course, just sort of pick an override number. We've taken a much broader view here. We are doing a very rigorous review of what our town and capital needs are, town and school operating needs and capital needs. We'll talk about how we've looked at that a little bit later. But in addition to that, we've looked at non-property tax revenue, our costs and places we can drive efficiencies, how we can defray the impact of an override or additional tax changes on certain vulnerable populations, seniors, low-income individuals, and veterans. And then, from a fiscal stewardship perspective, making sure that the additional revenue that we potentially gain here is money that we steward well, that we preserve our bond ratings, that we have low levels of debt, and that in general we're doing things in a really fiscally responsible way. And we'll talk about all the things that mean. I hope none of you hang up after I say this, but spoiler alert, we will not have a number tonight. We don't have a number probably anytime near term. We're doing a lot of work to get to a number, but it's really as one piece of a broader strategic plan. And that probably will not be ready until toward the end of this year and then really into 2026. Okay. So you can go on to page 5, Carol. So who's doing the work before we get into some of the findings or some of the strategy behind it and some of the findings? Who's doing the work? So the leadership is myself and Michelle Pryor, who, of course, I'm sure all of you know is our select board chair. She and I have sort of co-chaired the effort, me as chair, her as vice chair. In addition to that, the full select board is a member of the body, a quorum of our school committee. So we notice everything as a meeting of the select board, the school committee, as well as capital planning. Saw one of our school committee members who's been very involved in the work is online. We have 3 core members of our finance committee. In addition to that, we have a number of FinCom members who have been acting as sort of researchers or broader support around the process, planning board, and then 7 residents, all of whom are town meeting members. I saw at least 2 of them on the line earlier, Candy Van Aken and Kathy Bodie, from all different backgrounds and areas of expertise, different lengths of tenure in town, different geographic parts of town. Mariano, who, as I mentioned, was select board vice chair with Lance, part of the last override. Kathy, of course, has been superintendent in Arlington. Candy, who has tremendous experience in town meeting. And then we have some newer people as well. We have folks who have some expertise in property development and other areas. So we've really tried to build out a general resident group that complements a lot of the people that we have from our existing boards. And altogether, if you add it up, it's about 25 people. We've been meeting pretty much every other Friday, often every Friday, particularly in May and June, and then more recently in September and October. We have built a 10-year forecast model. We've, I think, run iteration. This says 15. We're actually already on a number closer to 20. Many more to come as we go through this. And then the leads for each area that we're looking at, you can see there. So Anthea and Tim for Workstream 1, Bill McGonigal and Enzo from Capital Planning for Workstream 2, Michelle for 3 and 4, and myself for 5 and 6. And behind each of those leads, there's a number of people from the committee supporting each area of inquiry, as we'll talk about this evening. The other thing I would say is the state of the town does a lot of research. It debates issues. It's an open forum, publicly noticed meeting. And then a lot of implementation gets kicked to either the select board or school committee. And we've already had some early implementation that those bodies have done. And then when town meeting votes are needed, as they are in many cases, those bodies will sponsor articles before town meeting. We will have many in the spring. We already have several in the fall that I'll highlight as I go through the rest of this. And then page 6, which you can see, and I'm going to skip this page for now, is really just all of the areas that we've looked at. I know it's in very small font. You could look at this on your own, on sort of your own time if you're interested. But against each of the work streams, we've looked at a variety of different areas. So, for example, in work stream 1, taking a look at school and town resourcing, all the town departments we've looked at. In work stream 5, taking a look at creating for the second row, programs focused on seniors and veterans. Workstream 6, taking a look at our AAA bond rating and our operating reserve policy. All of the areas on here have really guided the work that we've done as a group. And we'll go through this in more depth for the bulk of the presentation. Before I do that, I want to take a bit of a detour and you know, this is page 8, and talk about what is the strategy behind all of what we're doing here. Because you look at that list on page 6, and you know, it can look like a laundry list. It's just a number of discrete initiatives that we're attacking. And the reason that we're attacking them is what's on pages 8 and then really the 3 pages that follow. And it's about achieving the goals that this town, broadly speaking, in a variety of contexts, has set for itself. So what you see here on page 8, and if you read our Winchester master plan or our housing production plan or the school committee's 2030 roadmap, all the documents that our various bodies, select board, planning board, school committee, have created over the years, and you try to distill out what are some of the key principles, they more or less arrange themselves into these 5 buckets. And this is language that's been debated by the state of the town body and by the select board. So you can see them here: academic excellence, safety, health, focus on natural and built environments, so that's sort of town-owned, particularly historic buildings, inclusive, particularly for longtime residents, and you know, and seniors, and then you know, real commitment to efficient government and excellent stewardship of our taxpayer dollars. And what we've done over the next 3 pages, and I won't read them to you, I promise, on pages 9, 10, and 11, is we've tried to take a fairly, you know, to the extent we can, objective perspective on where we are as a town. You can just stay on page 9 if you want, on where we are as a town today in each of these buckets, and that's what's the left-hand side, and then where we still have more work to do. So there's a lot that we've done, and that's the good news. You know, for example, with regard to academic excellence, we have had dramatic improvement in certain areas of our education program. We've had dramatic improvement in some of our school buildings. You know, the town, from a safety and health standpoint, has very low crime. You know, we have a high quality senior center with well-used course offerings. There's a number of areas, and you can read through all of them. I won't read them to you. That we have a lot we can be proud of. And then on the right side, what we want to do as we go forward to achieve what our residents are asking for in each of these buckets. And so what we've done, and you can see, and you can read this in your own time, on the right-hand side of pages 9, 10, and 11, what we've done, and if you flip to page 12, Carol, what we've done is we've said, so let's consider all of the areas that we want to still, you know, progress the ball as our goals. And what you see in the middle of this page is all of the right-hand bullets of the preceding 3 pages. So we've done, you know, a lot of things in excellence in education. There's some areas we still want to achieve, like overhauling our early literacy and math curricula. We want to augment some of our special education resources, particularly what's called Tier 2 or what is now called MTSS. We want to continue to steward and maintain our buildings. And so from there, what is the impact on each of those goals from state of the town? Some of the state of the town, for some of these goals, state of the town impacts them very directly, some of them a little bit less directly. But the whole concept has been, for each of our work streams, and you can see where they tie out on the right-hand column, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or 6. For each of these goals, what we've tried to do is to say, we're doing these things because they support our broader strategic goals as a community. They're not just financial goals. And that's because they're rooted in the 5 principles that we have as a town. So it's a little bit of a detour sort of on the strategic thinking that sits behind the initiatives, but I just wanted to make sure that the group had a chance to talk about that. And the state of the town actually carved out a full meeting to go through this in depth. And we had a lot of, you know, really rich conversations. People also had a lot of very clear views on what should be on this list and what shouldn't be. So why don't we then get into sort of the main work? And so if you move on, Carol, to page 14, what I'll do for this section, because this is meant to be sort of our key findings, what I'll do is I'll just spend about a minute or a minute and a half. We have 1 page per work stream on each of the 6 work streams, and then, you know, I'll finally pause and happy to sort of have the open dialogue. So as I said, sort of work stream 1, town and school operating needs. What you see here is the area, the progress we made, and then the action item. So we've done a lot of work to review historical school budgets. The select board has agreed on a level services assumption for what we're going to use for the public schools. We've communicated that in writing, you know, 4 members of the select board to the school committee. Obviously, they have the school committee is in the middle of contract negotiations, so it's an important number for us to communicate what we think is a fair figure for level services, and that number is 3.5% to 4%, sort of averaging 3.75%. We will see where the school committee is able to achieve. There's an element of this that's not in their control, but we've communicated that across to them and had a dialogue with the chair, the vice chair, one of the members who's here on the phone, as well as the superintendent. In addition, the school committee has articulated to us, the representatives, what their sort of 5-year plan for net additions is. They focus strongly on literacy and math overhaul, as well as those additional support for diverse types of learners. And so we are still doing some work to prioritize those additions in our model, but we've made a fair bit of progress here. So this one's in quite good shape. Similarly, on the town side, we've had discussions with all of our major departments. You can see listed. We don't foresee any substantial new additions in any of those, police, fire, DPW, clerk, et cetera. There may be some areas where we need strategic additions to add redundancy and resiliency into our departments. So if one person gets, as they sort of say, hit by a bus, the entire, say, technology infrastructure of the town doesn't collapse. So there are some areas we're going to have to make those additions, but we don't see any major shifts on the municipal side. I would also say that the union negotiations are settling out, and we'll see where they all land. But so far, we don't anticipate substantial expenses, just more ordinary course, and then with additional revenue, we should be able to fund those. Operating metrics are a key one that we've talked about. School committee members are discussing sort of a data dashboard using DESI data. This is something Select Board's been very focused on the municipal side. So we spend money on DPW. Well, how many potholes do we fill? How many parks do we maintain in a given month? What's our fire response times? That type of very sort of performance-oriented, goal setting is something the Select Board has said is important. And as we've revised our deputy town manager role, as most of you know, our longtime assistant town manager is going to be retiring. He's actually kind of already retired. He's just helping us out through fall town meeting. We're going to be repositioning that role. And that's something that we've debated as a body and that we think is really important because that person we really want to drive operational excellence within the municipal side of the government. You can go on to page 15. Capital, we have a group of the Select Board members, school committee member, and capital planning committee has met extensively on the queue of projects. It exceeds $80 million over the next 5 years. We've taken a look at what we have from our existing capital and building stabilization funds. We've designed 8 different packages for override amounts, or they could be exclusion amounts, depending on where we choose to go, to attack different chunks of that backlog. The most pressing priority is Town Hall, which is an asset that needs substantial work that's been deferred. The second most important set of critical repair projects relate to the schools. So Lincoln, Ambrose, and McCall all need substantial systems work. And so we are debating, various alternatives that's been presented to the Select Board, and it'll get folded in alongside of the operating needs. The other big question is coordination with CPA. So CPA is going to have their first pilot round at fall town meeting. They're bringing $1,036,000 of projects forward. Of that, about $350,000, which is right around 33%, actually come off of the capital queue. Meaning, the capital planning committee has a queue, as I said, of mid-80s millions of dollars, and CPA, which is roughly this year it'll be 1.6 because there's no state match, but going forward it'll be closer to $2 million. That is a recurring source of money that was absolutely marketed, at least in part, as a way to help with some of our capital backlog. And so one discussion and debate that we actually really need fall town meeting to weigh in on, and we've talked with the chairwoman of this WCCP, the chair of the capital planning committee, Michelle and I, about doing some kind of a survey where we actually ask town meeting, what kind of coordination do you want? Do you want 500,000? Do you want $1 million? Do you want $1.5 million? Because we need to have a view of how much of CPA we're going to use on an annual basis against our capital backlog. And we could use virtually all of it if we wanted to against our historic buildings and open space needs, which are so great. Or do people want to see a lot of that go for sort of new community-driven projects? So that's something that you'll see at fall town meeting. Looking at a business improvement district, something Select Board discussed, certainly has long-term value, limited dollars, sort of $5, maybe $100,000, 5 figures, maybe $100,000. at most annually. We've deprioritized it for now, given we don't think there's a lot of uptake from center businesses, and it's a small sum of money relative to the other things that we're talking about. On to page 16, we've also, as I said, not just looked at our revenue and needs from the core levy, but also from non-levy revenue. So transfer station, we've had a group take a very hard look at the transfer station, talk about different concepts to raise commercial rates, increase commercial volumes, and also to implement pay as you throw, which is something that would be not for now, but for next year. We have heard some very out of the box concepts that group has come up with, that are at least worth. It's worth having had the group had a wide mandate to go back and explore things and come back to us. Near term, the select board has already, as of Monday night, chosen to raise commercial rates. We've also made permanent our commercial hauler pilot that we started earlier this year. So those are initiatives that will add revenue to the transfer station. We've chosen to take some of that to try to give a little bit of relief on the residential side. So we cut the residential permit by $10 on Monday. And as we look forward, we'll continue to grow the amount of income we generate from the commercial side, giving either relief on the residential side, or exploring the concept of moving to pay as you throw. We have a very high residential sticker fee at $340, soon to be $330. Pay as you throw is the idea of turning it into more of a utility where people pay a modest base fee and then pay per bag. They might pay $1 per bag, let's say. And so for homes that are generating more modest levels of trash, that can be a good alternative that can allow them to save money on the sticker fee. We're taking a hard look at growth in new developments. Planning board has obviously undertaken rezonings of the Center Business District and North Main Street. Select board issued a letter, as did Council on Aging, the AHT, in support of 33 Mount Vernon, right next door to where we're sitting here. That asset's one of the larger ones. It could generate about $750,000 of gross revenue. Other smaller, projects like on Main Street, 972 Main Street, are smaller. Certainly a six-figure number, but not quite as large. And so as we continue to see growth of new developments that have a mixed-use character, so commercial combined with residential, that should ideally help us with a little bit of commercial growth on a relative basis, but also just broadly add revenue to the base of the town. Those are, as all of you know, long-term projects. It's not something that's going to cure our needs, but it's something that absolutely can help. Just to give people a sense, to generate $1 million of revenue, one would need to build $90 million of real estate. So again, it's something that we want to continue to increase the level of growth, but it's not going to solve sort of the problems, or certainly not overnight. We're also taking a look at our fee schedules, many of which have not been updated since before the pandemic. We've done some benchmarking against other towns, not huge dollars here, but certainly north of 100,000 altogether. And that is a set of rate increases that we would choose to make, some this year and then some for next fiscal year. Page 17, which is workstream 4, structural costs and efficiencies. Utilization of town assets has been a big one. We've had great discussions among the select board, the school committee, capital planning, and the FinCom around a variety of town assets. Mystic School, for example, school committee has decided to access back to the select board. They have a fall town meeting article around that. And the select board will explore creating a board for the rec department, because there's a number of programs that occur in that building, but there's a number of those that could be moved to either a new facility, or rec may not want to do any longer, or could be done in our school building. So that's a long-term visioning that we need to think through. School committee, select board, and capital planning are also sponsoring an article. It'll actually be at Springtown meeting because there's a 1-year delay to demolish the Sanborn garage. Some people call that the carriage house, and that's something that was unanimously supported. And then school committee and planning board are also sponsoring a GIS study this fall to really take a look at where the students are. We have some buildings like Ambrose and to some degree VO and Lincoln that are bursting at the seams. We have a building in Lynch that is 30% kind of vacant on day one because it's so large compared to the previous building. So taking a very hard look at where the students are to make sure that as they look at their long-term capital requests, the modular units at Ambrose, for example, are going to hit their expiration date. VO can add classrooms, but it's a key question: do we want to? Exactly what type of a Ad Reno, are we looking at Morocco for renovating and really rehabbing that building? Those are the kinds of questions that the school committee is going to be confronted with that have tens of millions of dollars of implication from a CapEx perspective. And so they're looking to they are bringing an article with the planning board for GIS services to help them really understand where their families are and the right way to go about this. Regional coordination is one that we've made less progress on, mostly because it's valuable, but the lowest hanging fruit that drive the largest dollars have already been picked. We already jointly procure, for example, all of our municipal health insurance with a consortium, but there's other areas, health services we've started recently to do with Melrose, figuring out other areas that we can coordinate with neighboring towns. I will say a lot of the research we've done as State of the Town with our neighboring communities, we've gotten to know them a lot better than we ever did. So it should lay the basis for that kind of discussion going forward. Maintenance contracts, we thought would be, a larger one. There's definitely still some value there, more around, deferring long-term capital expenses, as opposed to driving near-term savings, but something that we'll continue to look at, particularly once we have a new town manager. And then finally, OPEB cost sharing. This is retiree healthcare, taking a hard look at how we stack up relative to peers in terms of the reimbursements we're giving people for Plan B, and then overall premium sharing. We have, Michelle Pryor and I, done a fair bit of work with our actuary on that, as well as our healthcare consultant. Those are sensitive conversations because they involve, retirees who have served the town. We're not, of course, looking to rip off any Band-Aids. Those would be gradually implemented, but have huge impact in terms of the long-term liabilities of the town and deflecting those if we, phase in changes over a reasonable time frame. Page 18 is worksheet 5, tax fairness. As I have mentioned, if we have a revenue increase, we want to make sure that we defray the impact of that on vulnerable populations. And you can see, I'll start at the bottom of this page. We have senior and veterans focused programs. There's veterans exemptions under the new law, the HERO Act that Governor Healy signed, which really double the exemptions eligible for that veterans are eligible for, particularly disabled veterans. We have senior tax deferral, which about 20 people take advantage of, where they can pay either a portion or even none of their property tax bill and roll it into their equity going forward, so that if they ever are short on cash, they have enough equity, they can remain in their home, and then later on that is paid when the home is sold. Similarly, we have a senior circuit breaker, about 24 people in it. The select board voted already to raise the limit from 3,000 to 3,500, keeping pace with the rate of inflation. Everybody right now is under 3,000. We anticipate 3,500 will continue to capture everyone. And then the senior volunteer program, where people can volunteer in schools and other municipal buildings, we'll adjust the rates on that in January when we look at that. And just to be clear, the senior tax deferral and HERO Act exemptions, we are bringing to fall town meeting. Select board is sponsoring those. The HERO Act, the veteran officer, Mr. Quill has done that with us. And on the senior tax deferral, we've done that with the Council on Aging. The chair won't be there, but the vice chair, Nick Tracy, will be speaking with us about that on the floor. The other big one, the much larger one that we've looked at, is the residential tax exemption. And so this is a technical feature that exists in the state law that a town can do, where we actually exempt a certain percentage of all properties in town, a certain dollar value from the levy. So 5 to 10% would translate to roughly $75,000 to $150,000. A median home in Winchester is about $1.5 million. And if we implement this on top of implementing an override, what we can do is we can blunt the impact of the override on our lowest valued properties, the more modestly valued properties. So say a property that has $800,000 of value or $700,000 of value. If we implement this type of exemption, it's not that with an override they wouldn't have any increase. It's that an increase of $600 or $700 might become an increase of $150. So it allows us to reduce the impact on our lower valued subset of properties, and put a little bit more of that burden on properties valued above our median property. So it's a small redistributional element that allows us to take some of the burden with a new revenue increase off of a subset of our properties. A select board could, of course, just implement this period. The select board in Winchester has never done it. And I think the motivation here is really if we do have that override, to pair the two of them together to defray the impact, not, that the select board woke up one day and decided this would be, suddenly something good to do to make a big tax shift. It's really about defraying the impact on certain populations. All right, last slide, and I will promise I'll stop talking. So fiscal stewardship, we take a look at our operating reserve policies, which have not been updated in 15 years. The select board moved its operating reserve targets from 6 to 10% to 10 to 14%, with a interim step of 8 to 14%. We also created a target, and the select board did that on its own. We also sort of reiterated our target of putting more of our operating reserves behind what's called the general stabilization fund, as opposed to free cash. General stabilization takes 2/3 of the vote to move money in or out. Free cash takes a simple majority. And so we will likely, assuming we have a successful override and the policy takes effect at Springtown meeting 2026, bring an article to make a large one-time transfer between the two halves of our operating reserve, from sort of the short-term savings account of free cash into that long-term account of general stabilization, which has not been touched in over a dozen years, and it allows us to generate potentially a little bit of additional interest income as well. We have written for the first time a debt policy for the town, so it's not something that's super long. The level of debt that we have as a town is very modest. It's about 1/3 of where agencies would say you have a problem. But we've sort of codified that. We've committed the town to long-term pay down of its liabilities and moved the town towards what we call a soft presumption to pay debt level principal as opposed to level service. So it allows us to pay down the debt faster than we might otherwise do so. And so this is a policy that we pass unanimously, that will guide our town manager and treasurer as we have debt issuances, particularly larger ones, for projects like storm water management and flood mitigation, but then of course a new school building. Last one, OPEB trust management. In addition to the actual OPEB benefits, we set aside money every year. We have about $8 to $9 million in our trust today. That started about a dozen years ago under joint initiative of the Finance Committee and the Select Board. That money has built up over time. We do have an article, by the way, this fall to add $350,000 into our OPEB trust, which we normally do in the spring, but we brought it this year in the fall. We've also worked with our commissioners of the trust funds, who are a group of investors who volunteer with the town, who manage our library and cemetery and other endowments, who currently manage our OPEB trust. But as that grows at a substantial clip, once we pay off our pension in 2027, and we start depositing $5 million, for example, every year into it, we need to have them move those funds to a professional manager. So our $150 million pension is managed by Mass Prim, which is the Commonwealth's very high quality manager for the state, which local cities and towns can use for pension and OPEB. And what we've asked the commissioners of the trust funds to do is to look at whether it's Prim or another provider. But as we start to put serious money away into that account, we need to move that to a professional manager. And so that's a discussion myself, our comptroller, treasurer, and the commissioners have had together. We've written a policy around that. Select board passed it unanimously. The commissioners and the treasurer will come forward with a Springtown meeting article to select that manager. So keep your eyes out for that, because town meeting does need to consent on which third-party manager they use. All right.
Good, thank you. If you've typed in questions in the chat, we'll try to take those now, and then we'll open the floor to direct or additional chat questions.
We have, it looks like only one question in the chat. It was from Pamela Court. Has the state of the town looked at how the financial goals align with the master plan for the community?
Yes, so that's and we can all have a different view of different language and verbiage, but if you go back to page 8, and then all those sort of goals in there, we really drew from a variety of the existing documents, including the the planning board's Winchester 2030 master plan, to come up with what we saw as the broad categories of what our goals are. And then from there, we broke that up into the goals that follow on the following 3 pages. So that was one of the input documents we used. When we wrote the first draft of this, we then talked about it at the state of the town. Planning board, of course, is there at the table for that. I believe the current chair was there as well as the capital planning rep, but he was at the table. So we did have a pretty robust debate from the educational perspective, planning, select board, residents, FinCom, about what really should go on this list. A couple of the people here on the screen were at that meeting. And some people had totally different ideas. Some people had wording edits. It's not to suggest this is perfect, but it is to say what we did is we tried to root the state of the town initiatives in the principles that the town has, articulated and debated over many years.
Does that answer your question, Pamela?
Yes, thank you very much. And it was very noticeable in the presentation that from what you presented, because I worked on the master plan, that it aligned pretty well, but I was just curious if you had looked at that document directly. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for the work on this, because it's a lot of work and it's very detail oriented. And I am impressed with the diversity of people and talent that you have on that committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Anyone else? Unmute, feel free. Wave your hand. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Carol. So just a kind of an overview question. So first of all, like Pamela said, I mean, this is enormously impressive, enormously helpful, detailed, but structured in a way that makes it accessible. And it's very reassuring that we're looking at our budget and our goals as a community in this kind of way. So I'm very grateful for the enormous amount of work. Is there a way to kind of identify, because there's so much in this, is there something that, a few things you would point out as, the more material linchpins of the plan, the things that, in fact, you feel like the success would turn on in some ways, or that would be most subject to debate, so that we can start to get our heads around some of that in terms of the priorities? I know all the pieces matter, but I wonder if you might guide us a little bit in that way.
So it's a very good question. And if Carol, if you want to go to page 6, where you can sort of just see everything at once, and I know it's fairly microscopic font, but hopefully people can zoom in on their screens. So I would say that work stream 1, particularly schools, but to some degree the whole thing, municipal, and then the metrics against it. But really, I think the biggest debate there is going to be, because municipal is mostly filling some gaps. What is the level of school resourcing that the town is ultimately going to want to see relative to, on one hand, the types of investments that the town is expecting in literacy and in math and in MTSS, which is that student support piece, as well as just sort of general rigor. And then, of course, what we think is achievable financially, and then the amount that the school's budget grows from a level services perspective informs the amount of if we assume there's not infinite dollars, and so the way that level services comes in, that allows space to have that additional targeted strategic investment, I think is probably one of the very core issues. And no doubt, if an override is size that allows us to do that, and then it passes, that will still be a very live issue that Springtown meeting is going to be debating again, because all an override is the ability to raise taxes up to a level. We raise what we need, so it's really town meeting who decides what are we spending, and then from there, how much of the levy are we gonna pull on. So I'd say that's probably one of the very biggest ones. I would say the first one on workstream 2 is also a very big one, which is a very similar discussion except on capital. We did in the last override, it was $10 million, of which 2 went for capital, but it was really more like 1.6, 1.4 to 1.6, depending on the source, because we used some of it to retire operating debt. So it was only about 15% capital. And I think that I think most people would agree we went a little bit lighter than maybe what would be ideal. We're great in this town at excluding capital from large projects like new education buildings, but actually putting in the resourcing not just to build a new Lynch, but also to maintain, Ambrose and Lincoln and McCall and Town Hall and a variety of other assets, I would say is probably the second big one. And then, I might skip actually all the way down. To some degree, it's maybe a residential exemption. I hope that's not something that has a huge debate and is vastly controversial. But it definitely helps with that inclusion element for seniors and others who have been here a long time. And I would also say the you can't point to any one part of it, but maybe the operating reserve piece of saying we're going to obviously invest in strategic additional services and capital, as I just described. We want to do that in a way that's fair, but we also want to make sure that money lasts. This is a town that has a reputation, deservedly, for excellent fiscal stewardship. There's 14 AAA communities in the state, 2 of which are Boston and Cambridge. That leaves 12 out of 349. Of those 12, precisely 2 do it with more than 95% residential, and those are Winchester and Belmont. And so we want to continue to show our taxpayers that we have disciplined ways of spending money, that we have reserves, we have turnbacks regularly, and that we're also building those reserves in an appropriate way, as general stabilization and not just reserves that we're calling upon all the time either.
Can I ask just a follow-up question? So that was very helpful to me. Thank you for that. Is there a kind of a sensitivity analysis? I would assume it would be very difficult to predict with regards to the impact of federal budget activity right now on the state, and then in turn flowing down to cities and towns. As I said, I imagine it's hard to predict, but I'm just wondering to what degree that could impact some of the things that are within the plan.
Are you
No,
saying,
absolutely.
Tom, are you saying,
That's-
Tom, if suddenly Title I goes away, for example, Title I funding for our schools, is
Yeah,
that
stuff like that.
those kind of scenarios? I don't know if PARS have you built those kind of scenarios into the model?
We have not built like dramatic, pullbacks in federal funding into the model. It is the federal funding, to be clear, is overwhelmingly, potentially entirely on the school side. So I don't know if Stephanie, you want to answer that? I'm happy to try answering.
Yeah, because I know, I don't know what it is for all of the different programs, but I know Title I, it's about $1 million. And it's the biggest of the federal grant money that we receive. I don't know about the other programs, however, but I can get that.
Medicaid's the next biggest one. Hi, sorry I'm late.
Michelle,
Medicaid billings, I don't know, $300,000-$400,000 a year, also done through our schools, but federal state match, and that's less likely. I think it won't be cut. It's an entitlement program. I think that's less at risk in terms of a one fell swoop cut, like Title I could be. But Medicaid, depending on, it has nothing to do with the health insurance subsidies that are going on right now in Washington. But you could see actually more people qualifying for Medicaid, but reimbursements might be limited because Massachusetts might be on a list of states with reimbursement rates slightly cut. So I think that's sensitive at like the tens of thousands of dollars, not $1 million level.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
I was gonna say, Tom, back in 2018, we attempted to run a Monte Carlo against the model. So you take each of the line items and you sort of it randomly says could go higher or lower, and how do you add up, and it does dozens and dozens. And it just gave us a heart attack because it just broadened the range of stuff you didn't know about. The potential costs went high and the potential benefits went so high, nobody believed them. So in the end, we sort of crouched down and looked at a lower number.
Yeah,
So-
I can imagine that it would be distracting, and the benefit of doing it would not stack up to the kind of, the benefit from the kind of focus that you're giving this. So I just wanted to ask about how that plays into the consideration, but I appreciate that.
The big benefit,
Yeah.
of the exercise was basically forcing us to think about what if things did go south. Did you have any idea what you could do? And that was an interesting discussion. And then we didn't plan on COVID, so.
So we are, as I said, the select board has raised its targets on operating reserves from the upper end from 10 to 14. We are sitting much higher than that, sort of 18% roughly, $23 or so million. We do have, I mean, the reserves exist in, obviously to stabilize our financial position, but also for emergencies like that. And the state, of course, also has, $8.5 or $9 billion of reserves as well, which is the highest they've ever had. So it's obviously something we have to keep an eye on, but at the same time, part of the reason to have the conservative financial management we've had is that we can't predict every eventuality, and we have, but at the same time, we do want to be prepared for it.
Yep. Right. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Anyone else? Unmute.
Rebecca?
I should probably know this if I looked at like my the schedule for fall town meeting, but I see that the title slide for this says fall town meeting 2025. So how much of this is going to be shared and how with fall town meeting? That is there going to be a state of the town presentation, or is this just going to be available for people? Because it's really helpful information. So I was just wondering.
Well, I think Rebecca, you're one of 35 experts on it now. So the other 150 people are going to rely on those of you who attended the 1 hour version of it, because the version for Article 1 is 5 minutes. I think you guys just saw I struggled to say my name out loud in 5 minutes. So we'll see how much we can get done in 5 minutes. It's not going to be a lot. This deck has gone out to all of town meeting twice. With TMMA's emails, we will of course provide the full deck to them. Anybody who has additional questions can get in touch with Michelle or myself or really anybody. But the Article 1 presentation is 5 minutes, so it's going to be a very thin sort of treetop layer of what we've just gone through. We had promised, Michelle had promised around Springtown meeting that we were going to do a bunch of briefings around fall town meetings. So these are obviously TMMA focused. Michelle and I did one last week at First House Pub that was more for the general public. On the other side of fall town meeting, especially as we start to close out our planning work, we will be able to then start to share more definitive concepts, broadly with the community, and there'll be a whole communication plan into the winter. Last time, they did a number of sessions, certainly close to between 15 and 20, I believe, at the Jenks Center, at schools, et cetera, where dozens of people would come in and have an opportunity to have the dialogue. But we're still a good way from that sort of broad-based communication. Right now, we've done the first house event, but it's been and then there's been some briefing at PTAs that this is just happening from various people, particularly from the school side. And then it's really been focused on town meeting members.
We have a comment in the chat from Robin Wolf. This is very impressive. Sometimes the structural limitations seem almost insurmountable. So it's comforting to see this level of analysis and brainpower devoted to overcoming them. Actually, I have a question as town meeting member.
No, you could only read from the chat.
Ms. Savage, precinct 5.
I was just curious whether, yes, Carol Savage, precinct 5, whether the committee came up with any proposals on the public-private partnerships line. Seemed like an intriguing concept.
Definitely some early concept work, I would say. There's sort of two halves. There's a capital side and there's an operating side. On the operating side, Karen Connolly is the one who did some of the work here. The concept has always been, can we create like a community foundation that broadly supports town? Because the two biggest, there's a bunch of little ones. The two big ones are the Winchester Sports Foundation and the Winchester Foundation for Educational Excellence, which of course she used to run, right, with me. And they raised, I think, between $500,000 and $1 million apiece. And so the idea, and Rebecca had some dialogue with her about this too, is can we band together several of them and try to, because everyone's hitting the same donors, right? And try to raise that money kind of jointly. And then what is that used for, right? Is what types of additional supplemental work is that used for, whether it's in schools or parks or wherever. Definitely an area we want to keep looking at. I would say we did some concept work around it, just given the magnitude of dollars there. And a lot of those dollars are already present. It's just about bringing them together in a more efficient way. It's one that will probably, go into 2026 as something we continue to look at.
I think it's something, Carol, that with state of the town, when this, wherever the override lands in March or wherever we land as a select board before March. Like state of the town, I think Paris and I are committed to, at least meeting quarterly, not disbanding the group. So public-private partnerships, some other longer term initiatives, transfer station, sort of, maximizing what we might do there or looking at, what other things we might recycle, who knows? But I think that would be a nice, regional coordination. So some things that have an 18-month tail could go after an override, after a ballot question, and could be a state of the town initiative that persists. And that would probably be a good candidate for one.
I think naming rights at the transfer station, if you get enough money, that could be, that could be something.
How proud would you be, Tom?
Exactly. Holly transfer station, there you go.
We could name it for him.
Yeah.
We could do a different name for the belt, for the composting heap, for
There you
the.
go.
Rebecca, it
I
looks like
keep,
you
I
actually
keep
wanna-
unmuting and muting because I don't want to laugh out loud with some of these comments. But what I was going to say was, and my daughter tends to burst into these things when it's at this time of the day. But I think, Tom, Holly, your question earlier about, of all this presentation, like what are the key couple things? I'm glad you asked that question. Paris, I appreciate your answer. And that might be in your 5 minutes at town meeting. It might be like, when I see presentations like this, I always look for the highlighted rows, right? Like I'm looking at on my other screen at slide 6 and there's 18 lines, but if you highlighted 4 of them, it might just give people, and then you can pick which ones you want that you think would be, that people should focus on for now. So it was just a follow-up on Tom's comment or question and your response. The other thing that really
Very
stuck
good.
out, because I have listened to a couple of these and, so I listen for what's new or different, is the number of communities with AAA bond ratings. Like I can get my head around in one sentence, there are 14 municipalities that have AAA bond ratings. 2 are Boston and Cambridge. Of the other 12, there are 2 that 95% are residential mostly, and it's Winchester and Belmont, right? Close enough, right? And I just heard that for the first time. That's huge because I feel like one of the other objections in the past about what we might do is, what about our AAA bond rating? And for me, you just answered that question, more or less. So, for what it's worth.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's helpful. Yeah.
That's right.
Very good. Anyone else? Are we good? I think we might be good.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. It was a good conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, TMMA, for bringing us together.
Yep.
Indeed.
The floating.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Hillary.
See
Good time.
Take care.
Bye. Al.
Bye.
No closing announcements.
Thank you. No plugs tonight. We would remind people to show up at town meeting.
This
You have one job.
Yeah, you have to listen and be polite and quiet.
Stop recording.